Welcome back. If you work anywhere near a ticketing system, a support queue, or a chain of stakeholders waiting on an answer, you've typed this word more times than you can count. To escalate. Today I want to slow down and actually take this word apart, because its family, the different forms it takes with prefixes and suffixes, shows up constantly in tickets, status updates, and those slightly tense emails that start with, "just following up." Let's start with the base verb. To escalate means to raise an issue to a higher level of authority or urgency, usually because whoever has it now can't resolve it. If the client doesn't respond by Thursday, we'll need to escalate this to the account director. Simple enough, but watch what happens when we start adding pieces to it. First, the noun form, escalation. This is the process or the act of escalating, and it's probably the form you see most often in workplace writing, especially in subject lines. Please treat this as an escalation. Production is down for 3 of our biggest accounts. Notice how the noun lets you name the whole situation as a thing, not just an action. You're not describing what someone did, you're labeling the event itself. That's useful in status reports. We had 2 escalations this week, both resolved within 4 hours. Next, the present participle, which doubles as an adjective, escalating. This describes something that is actively getting worse or more urgent right now, in real time. The support tickets are escalating faster than the team can triage them. Or as a pure adjective describing a situation, we're seeing an escalating number of timeout errors since the deploy. The ing here captures motion. It's not static, it's climbing, and that urgency is exactly why the word gets chosen over something calmer like increasing. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting for word family purposes. The prefix de. In English, de often reverses an action, and to escalate does exactly that, to reduce the intensity or urgency of a situation, to bring the temperature back down. Once the client saw we'd already identified the root cause, we were able to de-escalate the conversation. This is a word you'll hear a lot in customer success and account management contexts, because part of that job is literally managing emotional and organizational temperature. A tense support call gets de-escalated once the customer feels heard. And naturally, we also get the noun, de-escalation. The support lead's calm response was a great example of de-escalation in action. Now let's look at a negative prefix, un, combined with the past participle, giving us unescalated. This describes a ticket or issue that has not been escalated. It's still sitting at its original level, unresolved but also, crucially, not yet raised further. You'll see this in dashboard filters and ticket queues. We still have 12 unescalated tickets from last week that are approaching their SLA deadline. That word is doing real operational work. It's flagging a gap, something that probably should have moved up the chain but hasn't yet. One more useful variant. The adjective form describing something that has gone through the process, escalated. This is an escalated case, so it goes straight to Tier 2. The difference between escalating and escalated is subtle but matters. Escalating describes something still in motion, getting worse. Escalated describes something that has already been formally raised and is now sitting at a new level, waiting for that level's attention. Let's put a few of these side by side in a realistic scenario, because I think that's where the family really clicks into place. Imagine a product outage. Early on, you might write, "Error rates are escalating across all regions." A few minutes later, once you've looped in leadership, this has now been escalated to the infrastructure team. Treat it as a P1 escalation. Later, once things calm down, thanks to quick coordination, we managed to de-escalate within the hour. And in the post-mortem, someone might note, 2 related alerts were left unescalated for 20 minutes, which delayed our response. 4 sentences, 4 family members, each one doing a distinct, precise job. What I like about this word family is that it mirrors the actual life cycle of a problem, rising, being formally raised, calming down, or sometimes slipping through the cracks unnoticed. Once you have all 4 or 5 forms available to you, you stop reaching for vague phrases like, "This got bad," or "We told the manager," and you start describing exactly where an issue sits in that life cycle. So next time you're writing a status update, try noticing which form actually fits. Is the situation still escalating, or has it already been escalated? Are you trying to de-escalate a tense client call? Is there an unescalated ticket sitting quietly in the queue that needs attention? Picking the right family member makes your updates sharper, and honestly, Makes you sound like someone who's fully in control of the situation, even when the situation itself is a mess. Hello and welcome back. If you work anywhere near a subscription product, SaaS, streaming, e-commerce memberships, doesn't matter. There's one word that probably gives you a small jolt of anxiety every time it shows up in a dashboard. That word is to churn. When a customer churns, they cancel their subscription or simply stop doing business with you. No renewal, no next invoice, gone. Today we're going to look at churn through its synonyms and its opposites, because in customer success and product marketing, this whole family of words is basically the vocabulary of survival. Getting precise about them helps you sound sharp in QBRs and in Slack threads with the retention team. Let's start with synonyms. The first is to cancel. This is the plainest, most neutral option. It's what the customer actually does, mechanically, in the billing system. You'd say, the customer canceled their plan after the free trial ended. Notice this is very concrete and action-focused. It doesn't carry much emotional or strategic weight. It's just describing the click of a button. To churn, by contrast, is more analytical. It's the word your team uses when talking about the pattern, not the individual click. You wouldn't usually say a customer canceled in a strategy meeting about trends. You'd say, we're seeing enterprise accounts churn at a higher rate this quarter than SMB accounts. It's the vocabulary of metrics. Churn rate, churn analysis, a customer who churned last month. It has that slightly detached, dashboard language feel to it. The second synonym is to defect, and this one is stronger and a bit more dramatic. To defect suggests the customer didn't just quietly let their subscription lapse. They actively left, often for a competitor. You'll hear this in a sharper, more strategic context. Several key accounts defected to a rival platform after our price increase. There's an implication of betrayal or loss of loyalty built into defect that plain churn doesn't necessarily have. If a customer churns because they simply don't need the product anymore, that's neutral. If they defect, it usually means someone else won them over. The third synonym worth knowing is to leave, which is the everyday, informal cousin of all of this. You'd use it in a casual conversation with a teammate. Yeah, that customer left last week. I think the price was the issue. It's the word you'd use talking to a friend outside the industry too. Nobody outside SaaS says, my streaming service churned me. They say, I left Netflix for a while. So, churn for the metric and the trend, defect for the competitive loss, leave for the plain, human description. Now let's flip to the opposite side, because churn doesn't mean much without its counterpart. The first opposite is to retain. This is the direct business antonym, where churn describes customers leaving. Retention describes the effort and result of keeping them. You'll hear this constantly paired with the word strategy. Our customer success team built a new onboarding flow specifically to retain at-risk accounts. Notice retain is often something a company actively does. It's a verb of effort, almost the mirror image of the passive, statistical feel of churn. The second opposite is to renew, which is more specific and transactional. It's the moment of truth action a customer takes when their contract or subscription period ends and they choose to continue. The contract is up for review in March, and we're fairly confident they'll renew. Where retain describes the company's side of the relationship, renew describes the customer's side. A company works to retain customers, and a satisfied customer decides to renew. Here's a nice way to hear all four words working together in one natural sentence. The way you might actually hear it in a meeting. If we don't improve support response times, I think we'll start to see accounts churn. But if we invest in proactive outreach now, we have a real shot at getting them to renew and keeping our retention numbers healthy. That single sentence uses the whole family naturally, without sounding like a vocabulary list. One more nuance worth mentioning. In reporting, you'll almost always hear churn rate paired with retention rate as the two sides of the same coin. Literally, if your churn rate is 5%, your retention rate is 95% for that period. They're mathematical opposites as much as semantic ones, which is part of why this pair is so useful to have solid in your head. When someone asks, what's our churn looking like this month, they're really asking the inverse of, how well are we retaining people? And being able to move fluidly between those two framings in a conversation makes you sound like you actually live in this data, not just report it. So to bring it together, to churn is your neutral, metrics-driven term for a customer leaving. To cancel is the plain mechanical action. To defect adds the sting of losing someone to a competitor. To leave is the casual, human version. And on the flip side, to retain is the company's ongoing effort to keep customers, while to renew is the customer's specific decision to continue. Next time churn comes up in a meeting, try reaching for one of these more precise cousins instead. It'll sharpen exactly what you mean. That's it for today's word. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Hello and welcome back. If you work anywhere near project schedules or client budgets, you've said this word probably 100 times this month alone. Tight. A tight deadline, a tight budget, a tight timeline for launch. It's such a normal word in our industry that we barely notice we're saying it. But today I want to use tight as our entry point into a broader idea. The difference between gradable and extreme adjectives, and how mixing them up, or never using the extreme ones, can make your English sound a little flatter than it needs to. So, quick refresher. Tight is a gradable adjective. That means it exists on a scale. Something can be a little tight, somewhat tight, quite tight, or very tight. The budget for this quarter is a bit tight, is a completely normal sentence, and very tight works fine too. Our timeline for the redesign is very tight this month. Gradable adjectives are flexible like that. You can dial the intensity up or down with words like a bit, quite, or very. But English also has extreme adjectives, sometimes called non-gradable adjectives, which sit at the very top of the scale already. They don't need very in front of them, because the intensity is already built into the word itself. And the extreme partner for tight, in the context of deadlines especially, is impossible. When a deadline moves from merely tight to genuinely impossible, you're not just saying it's difficult, you're saying it literally cannot be done, given the constraints you have. Compare these two sentences. The client wants this feature by Friday, which is very tight, but we can probably make it work if we cut the QA phase short. Versus, the client wants this feature by Friday, which is completely impossible. We haven't even finished the API integration yet. You can hear how the second sentence closes the conversation, while the first one leaves room to negotiate. And this is the key grammar point with extreme adjectives. We don't say, very impossible. That actually sounds a little odd to a native ear, almost like saying, very enormous. Instead, we pair extreme adjectives with words like completely, absolutely, or totally. So you'd say, shipping this by end of day is absolutely impossible given the server outage, not very impossible. Small detail, but it's the kind of thing that instantly makes spoken English sound more natural. Let's build out this pattern with a couple more pairs you'll recognize from daily work. Take the gradable adjective busy. You might say, I'm quite busy this afternoon, but I can squeeze in a 15-minute call. Totally normal, totally gradable. Now the extreme version, swamped. I'm completely swamped this week, 3 client presentations and a budget review, all before Thursday. Notice again, we don't say, very swamped, it's completely swamped, or absolutely swamped. The word already carries maximum intensity, so very would actually weaken it, oddly enough, by making it sound like you're trying to add strength that isn't needed. One more pair, since this comes up constantly in stakeholder meetings, the gradable adjective angry, and its extreme counterpart furious. The client was a little angry that the report was delayed by a day, mild, manageable. But the client was absolutely furious when the entire dashboard went down during their live demo. That's a very different situation, and the word choice tells your colleague exactly how serious this is, before you even explain the details. So why does this matter for someone drafting a status update or narrating a stand-up meeting? Because if you describe every deadline as tight and every problem as busy or angry, your listener has no way to distinguish a manageable challenge from a genuine crisis. But if you save the extreme adjectives, impossible, swamped, furious, for the moments that truly deserve them, your language starts doing some of the communication work for you. Your project manager immediately understands the difference between, this timeline is tight, but doable, and, this timeline is impossible without more resources. That's not just vocabulary, that's you managing expectations more precisely, in fewer words. One small caution. Because extreme adjectives are strong, using them too often can dilute their power, the same way overusing important does. If everything is impossible or furious, listeners stop trusting the intensity. Save them for when it's genuinely true, and let plain old tight or busy do their job the rest of the time. So here's the practice for today. Next time you're about to describe a deadline as very tight, pause for half a second and ask, is this actually just tight, or is it, honestly, impossible? Choosing the right one might change how your team responds. Hello and welcome back. Today's phrase is one you've probably seen sitting quietly in a Google Analytics dashboard, maybe not getting much attention until someone in a meeting suddenly points at it with concern. Bounce rate. As a quick refresher, bounce rate is the percentage of visitors who land on a page and then leave without clicking anywhere else. No second page, no deeper look around the site. It's a single number, but the way native speakers talk about it is full of specific, predictable word partners. So today, instead of just defining it, let's actually build up the phrase the way you'd hear it used in a real analytics review, one collocation at a time. Let's start with the adjectives that describe it, because this is where a lot of the meaning actually lives. The most common pair is high bounce rate. If a landing page has a high bounce rate, that's usually read as a warning sign. People are arriving and immediately deciding this isn't what they wanted. You might hear, our pricing page has a surprisingly high bounce rate, so let's check if the messaging matches what the ad promised. On the flip side, you'll hear low bounce rate, which usually signals that people are sticking around and exploring. For example, the blog post has a low bounce rate. Readers are clicking through to related articles afterward. Notice both of these are describing the number itself, high or low, like describing a temperature. Now let's move to the verbs, because this is where you start sounding like someone who actually works with this data daily, not just someone who read the definition once. A very natural verb pairing is reduce bounce rate. This is action-oriented. Someone is actively trying to bring the number down. We redesigned the hero section specifically to reduce bounce rate on mobile. Very close in meaning, and just as common, is improve bounce rate. Interestingly, improve here still means making it lower. Since lower is better, English speakers treat improving a bounce rate as shrinking it. After we sped up page load time, we managed to improve bounce rate by a noticeable margin. You'll also frequently hear the verb lower, used almost interchangeably. Adding internal links helped lower the bounce rate on our homepage. There's also a very common structure using the preposition to when comparing performance, and it's worth knowing because it shows up constantly in reporting. Bounce rate dropped to a certain percentage, or bounce rate spiked to a certain percentage. After the redesign, bounce rate dropped to 32%, down from almost 50%. And when things go the wrong direction, right after the migration, bounce rate spiked to over 70%, something broke. That verb, spiked, is worth noting on its own, since it collocates specifically with sudden, sharp increases, not gradual ones. Now, one more pairing that's incredibly common in actual meetings. Bounce rate by something, by page, by device, by traffic source. This is how people narrow the conversation from a vague overall number to something actionable. Can we break down bounce rate by device? I suspect mobile is dragging the average up. Or, let's look at bounce rate by traffic source. Organic search might be behaving very differently from paid ads. This, by construction, is doing a lot of work. It turns a single flat statistic into a diagnostic tool. And finally, there's a collocation that's less about the number and more about interpretation. Acceptable bounce rate. This one shows up when teams are trying to set a benchmark. What's considered an acceptable bounce rate for a blog versus a checkout page? This is a great phrase because it reminds us that bounce rate isn't inherently good or bad in isolation. A high number on a contact page with only a phone number listed might be completely fine, while the same number on a product page could be alarming. So if you put this all together, a very natural, native-sounding sentence in a real meeting might sound like, our bounce rate spiked to almost 60% last week, so the team is working to reduce bounce rate on that landing page. Right now we're breaking it down by device to see if it's a mobile-specific issue. That single sentence uses 4 collocations we just walked through, and it's exactly the kind of sentence you'd actually hear from a marketing lead or analyst. The real skill here isn't memorizing the definition of bounce rate. You already know what it means. It's building the muscle memory for which verbs, which adjectives, and which prepositions naturally attach to it, so when you're in a live discussion, the phrase comes out smoothly instead of sounding assembled word by word. That's it for today. Next time you're staring at a dashboard, try narrating it out loud in English. High, low, reduce, spike, break down by. It's a small habit, but it adds up fast. See you in the next episode. Hey, welcome back. So picture this. You're in a WhatsApp thread with a freelance developer, and you write, "Come on, can we haggle on this rate a bit?" Totally normal, totally fine. Now picture the same conversation, but it's with a vendor's legal team, over email, about a six-figure SaaS contract. If you write, "Let's haggle," something feels off, right? That mismatch is exactly what we're digging into today, the verb to haggle, and its more buttoned-up cousin, to negotiate terms. Let's start with to haggle itself. It means to go back and forth persistently over a price, usually informally, sometimes with a bit of friendly pressure on both sides. It has a slightly market stall flavor to it. You can almost picture two people arguing cheerfully over the price of vegetables. And that flavor carries over even in a business setting. If you're chatting with a teammate about a freelancer's invoice, you might say, "I tried to haggle with him over the hourly rate, but he wouldn't budge below $80. That's casual, conversational, the kind of thing you'd say over coffee or in a Slack DM. It works because both people already have a relaxed relationship. There's no formality to protect. Now, the formal equivalent, to negotiate terms. This phrase shows up in contracts, procurement discussions, vendor onboarding calls, anywhere the stakes are higher and the tone needs to match. Instead of haggling over the price, in formal English you negotiate terms, and terms is doing a lot of work there. It's not just price, it can include payment schedules, service level agreements, renewal clauses, all of it. So in a client email, you might write, "We'd like to schedule a call to negotiate terms before finalizing the contract." Notice how much more neutral and professional that sounds compared to, "Let's haggle about the contract." Nobody wants to picture their procurement director haggling like it's a flea market. Let's put them side by side in a very similar situation, so the contrast really lands. Informal, talking to a colleague. "I spent 20 minutes haggling with the hosting provider, and I finally got them down to $60 a month." Formal, writing to that same hosting provider's account manager. "We would appreciate the opportunity to negotiate terms regarding our monthly hosting fee before renewing the agreement." Same underlying situation. You want a better price, but completely different register. One sounds like a story you'd tell a friend after a small victory. The other sounds like something that belongs in a PDF with a signature line at the bottom. Here's a nice way to think about when each one fits. Ask yourself, is this a conversation, or is this a document? If you're venting to a coworker about a supplier who won't lower their price, haggle is perfect. It's vivid, it's got personality, it even implies a bit of effort and mild struggle. "I haggled for 20 minutes and barely moved the needle," tells a little story. But the moment you're representing your company in writing, or speaking to someone outside your organization in an official capacity, you want to negotiate terms. It signals that this is a structured, professional process, not a personal tug of war over money. There's a middle ground too, worth mentioning. In a slightly more neutral business conversation, say, an internal Slack channel with your manager, not a client, you might soften things by saying, "I think we have room to negotiate on the pricing," dropping terms, and just using the verb on its own. That's a nice middle register, professional but not stiff. Compare that to something like, "Let's just haggle them down," which your manager might say casually in a meeting, but would probably never write in a follow-up email to the vendor. One more angle. To haggle can sound a little negative if used about your own company in a formal context, because it implies scrappiness, maybe even a lack of preparation. Imagine a client reading, "Our team haggled with the vendor for weeks." It sounds slightly chaotic. Compare that to, "Our team engaged in extended negotiations to finalize favorable terms." Much more composed, much more in control, even if, honestly, behind the scenes it was just as messy. So here's the takeaway. To haggle is your casual, human, slightly playful word for arguing over price. Save it for teammates, friends, quick updates where personality is welcome. To negotiate terms is your professional, neutral phrase for the same underlying activity, and it's the one you want in emails, contracts, and calls with people outside your inner circle. Next time you're drafting a message about pricing, pause for 1 second and ask, "Am I telling a story, or am I representing my company?" That question alone will usually tell you which phrase to reach for. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today's word is one that's become absolutely essential in remote and hybrid workplaces. The verb to onboard. If you work in IT or web marketing, You've probably used this word constantly: onboarding a new hire, onboarding a client, onboarding a new tool into your stack. But instead of just defining it once and moving on, I want to use this word as a little case study in how English builds meaning through prefixes and suffixes, because once you see the pattern here, you'll start noticing it everywhere. Let's start with the root. The word board originally comes from getting on board a ship, literally stepping onto the vessel before it departs. So when someone is on board, they've joined the journey. From there, English attached the prefix on to make a verb, to onboard, meaning to bring someone into the organization and integrate them properly, with training, documentation, access to systems, introductions to the team, the whole structured process, not just a welcome email. Here's an example. We usually onboard new engineers over 2 weeks, starting with environment setup and ending with their first small pull request. Notice it's a full process, not a single event. Now, once you have a base verb like this, English loves to add suffixes to create other useful forms. The most common one you'll hear constantly is ing, turning it into the noun onboarding. This is probably the form you already use the most. Our onboarding process used to take a month, but we've streamlined it to about 10 days. Notice how onboarding here isn't the action itself, it's the name of the whole system, the checklist, the documents, the meetings. That's a really productive pattern in English. Verb plus ing becomes the name of a process, like training or planning. Next, the suffix ed gives us the past participle, onboarded, which we use to describe someone's current status. She was fully onboarded by her second week, so she could already join client calls independently. This is especially useful in status updates and project tracking. Onboarded becomes almost like a checkbox state, similar to how you'd say a ticket is resolved or a deploy is shipped. Now here's where it gets interesting, because we can add a prefix to the front of the whole verb. Add re, meaning again, and you get re-onboard. After his 6-month leave, we had to re-onboard him, since the whole toolchain had changed while he was away. The prefix re is one of the most productive prefixes in business English generally. You'll see it in re-engage, retrain, relaunch. And it always signals doing something a second time, often because circumstances change. And then there's the pair that really shows the logic of this word family. The opposite prefix off, giving us to offboard, and the noun offboarding. If on means bringing someone onto the ship, off means the reverse, helping someone leave cleanly, revoking access, transferring their responsibilities, doing an exit interview. When a contractor's project ends, IT needs to offboard them the same day, so their credentials don't stay active. And as a noun, our offboarding checklist includes disabling their VPN access and archiving their email account. This on-off pair is genuinely useful to memorize together, because once you know it, you can predict it instantly the next time you meet a similar pair, like onload and offload in a technical context, or even online and offline. One more small but handy variant: the adjective form using able, as in onboardable. It's less common, a bit more casual, but you will hear it in conversation. This new CMS is really onboardable. Even non-technical marketers pick it up in a day. It describes something that's easy to bring people into or get people started on. So just to recap the family, the base verb is to onboard. Add ing for the process noun, onboarding. Add ed for the completed status, onboarded. Add the prefix re to repeat the process, re-onboard. Flip the prefix entirely to off for the opposite process, offboard and offboarding. And occasionally you'll meet the adjective, onboardable. What I like about this example is that it's not an isolated vocabulary item. It's a demonstration of how flexible English word building really is. Once you're comfortable spotting a prefix like re or off, or a suffix like ing or ed, you stop needing to memorize every related word separately. You start predicting them. Next time you meet a new business verb, try running it through the same exercise. What happens if I add re? What about the opposite prefix? What noun form would ing give me? That habit alone will expand your working vocabulary far faster than memorizing word lists ever could. That's it for today's word. Next time you're setting up a new hire's laptop or writing a company wiki page, listen for how naturally these forms slide into the conversation around you.